Calmness befell the winds, and a settled, lukewarm temperature brushed up against the fur of nearby bystanders. Say what you will, the meteorologists yelled to the skies that this day would mark the end of Acera's frivolous weather patterns, and that seemed to be the case. Vulpecula Noel took complete refuge in these ideas of grandeur, taking a rarity and putting his faith in optimism. He had grown tired of the weather and its inconsistencies, being unable to decide between rain, misting, sleet, heavy winds, or even snowstorms. Spring was upon them, and he and his friends welcomed it with open arms. Above all else, Vulpecula wanted to return to work on his cases. While still considered a rookie when it came to his detective work, because his father was Hensley Noel, it wasn't too difficult for him to find clientele. However, in recent days clarity came, and he found that the weather meant even criminals didn't feel like leaving the house. He did have one case, though, in the rainy weather, which he found to be an absolute experience. There is something to be said for the thinkers that did their work inside of small cubicles or bedrooms. But Vulpecula wasn't one of them. He couldn't sit still very well, and it just wasn't for him. Thankfully, the sun was once again ready to shine upon them, and without further ado, the good fortune would continue as Vulpecula was even welcomed with a case. Everything feels so much merrier outside now. It's funny, but one really does feel happier in the summertime, Apis confessed, beholding the scenery filled with trees beside houses and a steady number of vehicles carrying traffic on the roads. There was never too much traffic in Acera. After all, it is the smallest of the 5 major cities in Maharis. There is never anything to do when it's wet out, just cooped in a cruddy room at the hotel all day, Lacerda retorted. Vulpecula hardly thought that the hotels at the city and inn were cruddy, but cared too little to argue. Instead, Vulpecula stared down at the sidewalk before him, noticing all the cracks and crevices, while at the same time trying to approximate how much further they would have to go. I think there is probably something psychological about it. I mean, besides merely that someone isn't able to go outside, the obstruction of the sun probably induces a feeling of pessimism that carries itself in each person. Vulpecula found himself once again throwing strong recognition over Apis's intelligence, citing it as a strong attribute in the trio's problem-solving capabilities. However, once more, he cared not about the discussions that they were having, and so he spoke. "Where is this McKinley Halls, and are we getting anywhere closer to it?" "It won't be much further now. It isn't far, and after all, we've only been walking for a couple of minutes," Lacerda responded at once, then turned his head away from Vulpecula and back to the sidewalk ahead of them. Right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. Vulpecula took a moment to appreciate that all 3 of their footsteps had become synchronized. Noel was feeling admittedly antsy, wanting so desperately to have something to sink his teeth into. "Apis, you received this email from Eric Leon, correct?" Vulpecula began and ended before starting up once more without waiting for an answer. Eric Leon messaged last night at around 11 o'clock at night and said as follows, excluding formal salutations: "I am writing this because I know that Vulpecula has proven dignified in his short tenure in dealing with unknown mysteries. While I have only read what the newspapers will share with me, I believe that you will likely find this one to be the strangest of all the cases that you have experienced. The sensitivity of this case is all too noteworthy to discuss the confines in a message over the internet." Then of course it is followed by the closing remarks as well as information about McKinley Halls. Is that correct? "Amazing," Apis starts out before Lacerda interrupts. "You can remember word for word something that Apis read out to both of us. But can't name the mayor of Acera, a place that you have lived for all of your life." "Lacerda, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast before we left," Vulpecula admitted shamelessly. It was true. Vulpecula had the memory of an elephant, but the unfortunate truth is that the elephant had long been dead. What did the attentive detective say when the elephant tried to stealthily trample past him? He didn't say anything because he didn't even notice, and this was the biggest reasons out of them all that Lacerda and Apis were necessary elements, and the Vulpecian... "I didn't have the opportunity to acquire Rescue's Tribune, I'm afraid, so we'll be going into this blindly," Apis confessed. "As I prefer. The Rescue Tribune is filled with propaganda in the same ways as the newspapers printed out by the Canes Venetici were. The only difference is Rescue does the courtesy of actually trying to obscure itself. Rescue Tribune has written many articles about her successes so far. They did a full-page article telling about how he solved her first case, and since then, all of her cases have at least been given short summaries," Apis pointed out confidently. "In the same articles writing about her successes, they refer to yours truly as nonsensical and unnecessarily rebellious." They arrived at McKinley Halls after more minutes of small discussion and beheld the audacity that the building carried with it. Vulpecula hadn't really known what to expect, but for whatever reason he never once gave thought to the idea McKinley Halls might be a fair-sized theater. There was a sign at the top of the building that said McKinley Halls with a sculpture of a human sitting in a chair eating popcorn on top of it. Vulpecula couldn't help but find some amusement in the idea of a human sitting in a chair and watching a movie. Below the sign in the sculpture was a marquee which read as such: "Welcome to McKinley Hall Theater, home of the Magnets. We are currently closed." While Vulpecula knew very little about theater, he had heard of the Magnets, a traveling troupe composed exclusively of Acera-born performers that specialized in various forms of entertainment. He recalled them being described as over-the-top, excessive, and bizarre in many of their methods of showmanship, oftentimes capitalizing on the spectacle of shock value. Evidently, McKinley Halls is where they like to perform most often. Before even being given the chance to attempt and see if the front entrance door was unlocked, they were welcomed in by a doorman wearing an overcoat and top hat. The suited penguin politely let them into the building and said that they had been expecting them. They were swiftly introduced to a unique and small-stature fellow with an ensemble which featured minishway in its confines. He wore lavender dance shoes with noticeable sparkling silver on the laces. He wore an elegant-looking bright red coat that had sigils and emblems scattered about, giving him the look of somebody of royalty. His leggings complemented the coat nicely in color, but up close, Vulpecula could see for certain that they were spandex, meant for easy maneuvering. With this, Vulpecula was easily able to assume that he was in presence of an actor. Upon inspection of his facial features, the puffy eyes of exhaustion emphasizing lack of sleep, and unkempt mane and the fact that his coat was messily unbuttoned, helped Vulpecula realize that this lion went by the name of Eric Leon, the very same which had emailed Apis asking for help. The fact that the doorman introduced him as Eric Leon might have also helped Vulpecula in making this assessment. "Welcome," Eric said in a raspy voice. "I am happy that all three of you could come." However, his voice indicated that he was feeling anything except for happiness. "I don't suppose that I can offer any of you a beverage before we start?" "I would prefer it if we could get on with what you need help with," Vulpecula answered coolly. "Very well. I suppose that we should make way to the stage before we begin. I have no doubts that the scene will be invaluable to you." Eric Leon turned his back to them and began to lead the way. The inside of the building looked exactly as Vulpecula imagined it would when he realized it was a theater. There was a counter to his right to buy tickets, food, and refreshments. To his left, there were posters hung up on the walls for several different plays. Some of them had dates for when the shows might be, and some had ribbons pinned on with the names of awards that they had received. Eventually, as they continued following him, the rows of posters ended, and instead, there were doors with numbers on them, each leading to a different theater to watch a specific show be performed. "Why don't you tell us what's up?" Lacerda asked rather abruptly, taking Vulpecula out of his thoughts. Eric didn't answer him for a while, not until he opened one of the doors. This one had a big red number 3 written on top of it, and walked inside. Vulpecula, Lacerda, and Apis followed him and were given the opportunity to behold one of the theaters. It wasn't enormous, capable of seating around 100 or 200 people, but not enormous, medium size, which made Vulpecula wonder about whether the other rooms varied in size. Between all the rows of chairs was a walkway leading to the stage which had a large red curtain dangling over it. 2 nights ago, one night before I asked for your assistance, we were doing a play called The Blood Lane Starlet. I needn't go in depths about the play's contents, but I will tell you that the lead part went to a female named Molly Louise, a snow leopard that played the role of the starlet in her rise to fame. Eric Leon stopped momentarily, as if anticipating himself to become emotional. She was kidnapped before the end of the second half. "So, what, somebody came and took her from the dressing room or something?" Lacerda inquired confusedly. "No, they kidnapped her during the play," Eric Leon announced. Vulpecula may have only been listening half-heartedly before, but as those words escaped from Leon's lips, he had his complete and undivided attention. "Elaborate," Vulpecula instructed plainly. While doing one of the scenes, she accidentally walked over one of the stage's trapdoors and triggered it. There was no scene in the play that called for the trapdoor, and so obviously she shouldn't have come down. A lot of the performers were taken aghast by this, as were the audience. However, nobody was in a frenzied panic. The audience thought it was nothing more than part of the act, whereas the performers thought it was a flub by the crew. They lock the trapdoor whenever it is not being used, so these kinds of things don't happen, but it didn't seem like a big deal. Molly would fall safely on a cushion, laugh it off, and we'd carry on, but she didn't come back. Vulpecula felt his mouth becoming watery, but didn't bother inspecting why that might have been. A kidnapping for Vulpecula to solve. It might as well have been his birthday, and while he succeeded at refraining from dancing the boogie-woogie in response, he did notice his foot tapping graciously to the beat of his operatic enthuse. Eric Leon didn't notice, but Apis poked at V with one of his sharp nails to show his dislike for the gesture. "Did you have a search party for her?" Apis asked. It was a question with an obvious answer. Eric Leon wouldn't have bothered requesting their help if he hadn't exhausted all other means. However, Eric Leon didn't point that out to him, and instead, he only offered a nod as an answer. We informed the police, but they couldn't find anything. They are doing searches for her now, and they promised that they'll find her, but I felt like there was more that I could be doing. Eric Leon walked up some of the steps leading to the stage and disappeared behind the curtains momentarily. Vulpecula found himself fidgeting with one of the theater chairs, rocking it back and forth for no reason at all whatsoever. Seconds later, Eric Leon revealed himself once more by opening the curtains with a braided rope from behind them, and that's why I came to you. What was your relationship with Molly Louise? Vulpecula asked. She was my partner. And does your partner have a family? Yes. Where are they? I haven't heard from them. Why is that? She never really talked about them much. That's kinda why she's a stage performer. This lifestyle fits her. And I mean, we'd always talk about one day being able to join the Magnets. That's a troupe for stage performers. They say that it's like a big family there, and it just seemed like a way to get away from it all. Are you saying that she has no ties whatsoever with her family? Yes. Eric Leon answered simply before elaborating. She's from Hardan, and that is where her folks are. She hasn't spoken to any of them in years. Vulpecula couldn't help learning more and more about Eric Leon with every word that he spoke. His disposition carried a certain eloquence and poise, but it wasn't enough to hide his roots. He looked and talked like a showman, and tried to sound it. However, his scrambled composure clarified to Vulpecula that he was from the country. Of course, this by no means that he was lacking eloquence, but rather to say that he hid the accent he likely inherited from living on the outskirts of Viscera. Everybody was taken by surprise, you say, but what steps were taken after everybody came to realize Molly's disappearance? The police officers were here before us. Did they share any of their discoveries with you? And besides that, were there any witnesses, ones that might have seen anything suspicious? Vulpecula walked up the steps leading to the stage and welcomed himself on eye level with Eric Leon, but not actual eye contact. Vulpecula's eyes browsed merrily at the trapdoor with the utmost of curiosity. A man reported that, as he was walking out of the theater, he saw a gentleman running outside to a car as if he was trying to flee. The man was carrying a darkly colored suitcase and appeared to be in a hurry. Alongside him appeared to be a female, and the man identified her as being Molly. He said that the man clutched her hand fiercely and that she seemed to appear anxious. Besides this, there hasn't been a whole lot of anything leaning in any direction. I was hoping that you might be able to shed some light on the situation. Eric Leon's voice started to sound a little resentful and agitated near the end of his dialogue, but regained his solemn disposition after seconds. What exactly did he see? It's that simple. As he opened the door to leave the theater, having seen one of the shows that McKinley Halls had that evening, the older gentleman saw two people leaving the theater. To be as specific as possible, he said that the gentleman leading the way was a medium-build gentleman, perhaps taller than average, wearing a leather trench coat and black top hat. The female fit the build of Molly Louise, and he claimed that she was wearing the same outfit as described on stage earlier in the show. The gent was described as aggressive, pulling her toward the vehicle while she was apprehensive and weary. He pulled her with his left hand and held a suitcase with his right. You believe this man abducted her against her will? V inquired. I see no other explanation. I think I should offer a little insight into theater. The performing arts are a tough life, especially in a smaller city like Viscera. There's a lot of competition. It's all about image, and it's easy to make enemies without even noticing it. I'll keep that in mind. Ah, well, then, if you may, please momentarily bid yourself adieu from me. I am up to task much more when I don't have an audience, and thank you for your time. I hope that I will be able to bring you information soon. Eric Leon seemed disheartened by the request, but to his credit, he diligently obliged and left the trio to revel in their thoughts. Vulpecula didn't say anything to Apis or Lacerda, and they said nothing to him. Apis and Lacerda stood quietly starry-eyed, while Vulpecula attempted to unravel the situation. He saw no reason for objection against Eric Leon's theorizing, but didn't find much realism in the transgression. There were too many dramatics, and too much risk. Everything seemed too perfect for an idea of such audacity. Vulpecula's mind immediately thought to the idea of extortion or blackmail, but that didn't explain why the kidnapper would have went to such theatrics. He wanted there to be showmanship and to send a powerful message. Do you think it's possible that Molly Louise was kidnapped? Apis asked earnestly. Possible, certainly, but not plausible. Not quite, Vulpecula immediately answered. I thought I saw you bite your tongue while Eric was talking, Apis said sharply, a small smirk somehow visible from his beak. He referred to the man that allegedly saw the kidnapper and Molly Louise leaving into a car as an older gentleman. I noticed immediately but chose not to investigate, and while we certainly can't dismiss the witness, we might want to find the keenness of the man's eyesight. If I recall correctly, there would have also been circumstances that might cloud up some of what he said. What circumstances are you referring to? Lacerda pondered aloud. He explained that it was 2 days ago in the afternoon when Molly Louise disappeared during their edition of the Blood Lane Scarlet, and he told us that the witness saw them fleeing to a vehicle minutes later. Consider how dark it would be, and think about how eccentric the weather has been recently. The witness would have had his view considerably obstructed by pouring rain, along with how dark it was and the off-chance possibility that he doesn't have the best vision. Vulpecula once more didn't make eye contact with Apis or Lacerda. He continued to find himself transfixed on the trap door. Vulpecula would probably never be mistaken for a fox of the theater, but was curious to how the trapdoor worked. Fortunately, he had always found it particularly easy to skim through everything said once before. These capabilities of the fox worked to his advantage. He closed his eyes and looked through the innermost confines of his conscious thought, his imaginary chalkboard, filled with all the notes regarding the case. All the movements that he made, every mannerism composed by Eric Leon during their conversation was completely accessible to him for a short time. Afterward, of course, the heavily filled chalkboard would be erased and replaced by a new case, but now it operated under his complete leisure. Elaborate, Vulpecula instructed plainly. While doing one of the scenes, she accidentally walked over one of the stage's trapdoors and triggered it. The trapdoor was simple. Unlike some other trapdoors that might have been lever activated, this didn't rule out that there wasn't a kidnapper, however, because the latch to unlock the trapdoor was under the stage. Molly Louise could have certainly unlatched it before appearing on stage, but she was the story's protagonist. Therefore, she likely wouldn't have had the time alone to be given the chance. Then there's the risk it could have been triggered by somebody else. Did you hear me? Lacerda called out before snapping his fingers in Vulpecula's direction in order to get his attention. Did you hear what I said? He asked, once again, with such uncertainty. Not a word, V answered honestly. Lacerda rubbed the temples of his forehead before repeating himself. I said, do you believe that we should disregard the witness's account since there's a chance it is not authentic? Quite the contrary. The testimony's relevance remains, but rather, I believe that we approach it with a grain of salt. Not full-heartedly accepting, but not condemning either. What are your instincts telling you? They are telling me that the solution to our little conundrum is unlikely to be discovered anywhere inside of this theater. But still, we should look under the stage, if for no other reason than for me to attempt at recreating the scene, Vulpecula answered. Vulpecula looked around the stage, appreciating the scenery. There were no backdrops, and so all the pulleys, sandbags, and props held a novelty to them. V headed uncomfortably one direction before turning to go to the next, not entirely sure which side of the stage would take him to where he wanted to be. He eventually sought to stage right, behind a white building prop with red handprints on the building, meant to look like smeared blood. Apis and Lacerda followed him. While trying to find his way down the stairs, Vulpecula almost inadvertently tripped over one of the weighted sandbags, but was able to keep his footing. Down the stairs, he beheld the spots dedicated to makeup. On the backside, there was a row of spinning chairs, each standing in front of circular mirrors, outlined by light bulbs, as well as several cosmetic supplies that Vulpecula didn't recognize. Beside all of them, there was a door leading to the lobby that Vulpecula chose not to investigate. On the side closest facing the theater, there were racks with clothing. Out-of-place ladders and pieces of plywood leaned against some of the walls. Finally, Vulpecula found what he was looking for, a small red push-and-pull plate door with a sign that spelled out the word storage. He pushed open the door, and true to the words, there were plenty of boxes and props stored. It wasn't cluttered, though, and the second that Vulpecula walked in, he could see the cushion directly beneath the trapdoor. Vulpecula could tell that the area wasn't finished, as there were plenty of nails jutting out from some of the walls, and wooden support beams placed sporadically throughout the area. His eyes browsed the room frantically, not looking for anything, but merely looking for the sake of looking. He walked over to the cushion lying in the middle of the room. Fittingly, the cushion was a scarlet color and felt like nothing more than a large sponge wrapped in a red cloth. Above him, he could see the bottom of the trapdoor as well as the latch that locked it from being triggered. There wasn't going to be anything of use in this vicinity, and that fact seemed strikingly obvious. Footprints in fallen fabric meant absolutely nothing. There were thousands of feet which had been walked under the stage, and plenty of items which carried no significance at all whatsoever. There was only one thing left to do in the theater. He directed one of his companions to ready a ladder to unlatch the trapdoor before returning to the top of the stage. He imagined the emotions which might be carried by Molly Louise. There was a play going on before her, only 100 or so watching her perform. Was she feeling anxiety? This isn't something that he could assume. After years and years on stage, surely she had been numb to some of the stage fright. However, she could still be anxious. If Molly Louise anticipated the happening, she would be worried of being caught. If there were a second individual, perhaps the man witnessed leaving the theater with a woman described as congruent in size and shape to Louise, she might have been worried he wouldn't unlatch the trapdoor on time. Maybe he'd even unlatch the trapdoor to be triggered by somebody else. A lot of things to consider, especially if there wasn't a second person. She'd have to be swift but not obvious at keeping anybody else from triggering the trap. This is assuming, however, that this wasn't a straightforward kidnapping. This is assuming that she knew, when in reality, she might not have. Her feet stand over the trapdoor, and she is feeling either one of two things. She is feeling relief that everything has gone according to plan. She is feeling astonishment, as well as confusion. This wasn't in the script. Vulpecula waited for what he believed was ample time for Lacerda or Apis to unlatch the trapdoor before stepping upon it. There was serenity to his fall. No swish or swipe at the air before landing on the cushion. He rose to his feet. Lending his eyes to neither of his friends, he looked around. What did she do afterward? A witness puts her in as entering a vehicle, which certainly seems plausible, but he also says that the man was forceful and aggressive. Vulpecula's eyes looked around as he imagined a man grabbing at him. There was likely an anxiety at this moment, but it is uncertain what it could have been caused by. The witness describes the man as pulling her toward the car, which implies that she was conscious. He did nothing to incapacitate her. If he did, he'd never be able to get her out without notice. Did she follow him for a reason? Was this extortion or blackmail? A gun pointed at her? She could have screamed. In fact, in this situation, silence would be essential. Vulpecula walked toward the door and opened it. What would Molly Louise, assumed kidnapper, be seeing outside of the storage area? It was dedicated mostly to makeup and cosmetics. Would there be more witnesses? Likely, and so why did nobody besides the man identify seeing her? A lot of the performers would be in the lobby, readying themselves to perform or stewing after their performance. There might not have been a lot in the room, but there would have been enough. They might have been distracted, but that doesn't mean they'd risk it. Vulpecula went back into the storage area beneath the stage, Apis and Lacerda both looking at him in confusion. Vulpecula didn't feel the need to explain his behaviors to them. They knew the drill by now. There were boxes and boxes stacked upon one another. Neither looked any more peculiar than the other. Vulpecula grabbed one of the boxes and pulled it with all his might, successfully moving it away from the wall, exposing nothing. He lifted a smaller box and walked it over to the other side of the room. His friends evidently picked up on what he was doing because they began helping him move the boxes until they found what they were looking for. A small door to the side of the stage. It hadn't been completely unexposed and hidden, but would be easy to miss if one didn't know what they were looking for. Vulpecula climbed over some of the boxes covering it and opened the door. The inside led to a janitor's closet and from there, the side of the stage. There was an emergency exit on each side of the theater. This would be much more likely than the front entrance. Vulpecula opened the door and sure enough, it led out the side of the building. The misdirection as well as the confusion would enable the means of escaping inconspicuously, although some attention might be drawn to the exit door being opened. Vulpecula admittedly felt discouraged at the rationalizations. There was a lot of assumption that came to the conclusions. Unfortunately, he could see absolutely no way whatsoever how two individuals could escape while everybody else remained oblivious. There was too much risk. Somebody would have seen something. He noticed the alarm system on the side of the door and lent thought to the fact that it didn't go off. It should automatically go off if somebody is using the emergency exit for a just emergency, but it didn't. He walked outside feeling the warm air touch against his skin, but in his head he was imagining it was raining, just as it was when she went missing. Feet stamping upon puddles of water while rain dropped on them. They would continue before turning left. Molly Louise would likely remain anxious or fearful. She would either be trying to fight away from the kidnapper or not be. She'd fight back or she would go willfully. But the man would be in a hurry, and therefore he would probably be pulling at her hand and trying to make her be swift. Vulpecula walks forth into the parking lot. They make it into the car, but not before being seen by an older gentleman that faintly sees them in the pouring rain. Vulpecula walks around aimlessly, knowing that this is the range where the imagination takes over, looking up at the entrance of the theater, and, all at once, the answer showed itself to him with astounding straightforwardness. "Welcome to McKinley Hall Theater, home of the Magnets. I'll tell you the truth, V," Lacerda began bluntly out of the blue while they sat down at the City and Inn's dining hall, each eating their usual meal and sitting in their assigned seats designated to them by Vulpecula, who oftentimes found change to be more cluttering than innovative, at least when it came to things of such importance. "I would certainly appreciate the truth over a lie," Vulpecula answered honestly, twiddling his fork around his food with little of an appetite. "I believe that Eric Leon was bamboozled and tricked by Molly Louise. You saw the way that he looked when we talked to them. He was absolutely devastated, and I am assuming that there is a little more behind their partnership than he is letting on," Lacerda explained. "Are you suggesting that they were lovers?" Vulpecula inquired curiously. "I am suggesting that one loved the other. I think that Molly Louise met somebody else, or maybe even somebody she knew while in Hardan. The life of a stage performer isn't very good, and I believe she probably wanted to spare Eric Leon's feelings. I am thinking that the person that the witness saw with Molly was that somebody else, and she hesitated because she didn't want to hurt Leon, Lacerda explained with a lot of confidence. Possible, Vulpecula said simply, neither agreeing or disagreeing. What about you, my feathered friend? He asked, motioning over to Apis. Apis looked at him. Eric Leon wants to believe that it's a kidnapping, but this doesn't necessarily look like a kidnapping to me, Apis commented. Exactly, Lacerda called out smugly. And what do you believe it appears to be? Vulpecula asked simply, once more seeming neither convinced nor uncertain. Now hold on, Lacerda, because while I think that your theory carries weight, I do have a thought for another. Well, you know how Eric Leon expressed that it was all about reputation and image in the theater? Granted, it doesn't look like a kidnapping, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be one with a different coat of paint. What if the kidnapper had dirt on Molly Louise, or somebody that she was close to, like Eric Leon? Her acting might serve as a martyr for containment of something scandalous. Apis's voice didn't carry nearly the same confidence as Lacerda with his theory, and he made sure to add, I'm just trying to make sure we see all the possibilities. At the end of his dialogue. Thank you, Apis, and extortion or blackmail is certainly a reasonable outcome to expect, Vulpecula stated warmly, a small but assuring smile on his face. Silence befell the room, aside of course the chit-chatting that occurred outside their social group. Vulpecula could hear the youthful conversing of a couple of young fellows only a few feet away from them, sitting in a booth. He could also hear teeth chomping down against their meal, an older couple that hadn't spoken much of a word since sitting down moments earlier. Vulpecula brought in a breath, taking in the aromas composed of various foods being prepared and the scent of the customers, most certainly. In the loving serenity of the environment before him, Vulpecula couldn't help but feel the callous stares of his acquaintances, obviously wanting something that he hadn't yet gathered. Well? Lacerda eventually mumbled sternly, a little bit of annoyance befalling his voice, as if he had secretly sent Vulpecula the well-deserved power of telepathy. I'm sorry, did you say something? V asked, knowing full-heartedly the answer to his own query. Which idea do you think nailed it the most? Do you believe what I said about her running away with a lover, or do you believe Apis's theory about her being blackmailed into an unwitting departure away from performing? You're kind of on the... Vulpecula wished Lacerda would brighten his vocabulary in such a way that discarded words such as nailed. There was no nailing to speak of in this evening's endeavors. What is your favorite film, Lacerda? Vulpecula replied casually. What? Lacerda seemed shocked with the rebuttal. What are you talking about? I am talking about films, commonly called motion pictures, flicks, and about a million other synonyms. I watched The Red Lane Starlet, the screen adaptation, I mean. As much as I would love to see Molly Louise's portrayal, I have little reason to believe she'll actually be returning to her role soon. Vulpecula's face momentarily wrinkled with despair at the fact. He really would have liked to have seen her portrayal. There were a couple of minor changes that some critics ranted about upon the release of the film. However, I thought it was rather enjoyable, had a certain light-heart apathy on such heavy subject matter. We were talking about the case, Lacerda called out angrily, hence the second exclamation mark. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that both of you had finished. Which one do you think is right? Neither, of course, Vulpecula answered back honestly. Then what did happen? Well, I have already concluded, I believe that the answer will come out in due time. What is the answer? Lacerda called out. Vulpecula, I swear, Lacerda stopped shortly after his ramblings. He couldn't find the words to verbalize his affection for the white-furred fox. Lacerda let out a breath, rubbing his love-filled temples to keep his infatuation under control. What is the answer? I've already cleared the chalkboard. The answer to the case has been found, and I don't believe there is any more reason for inspection. Molly Louise will come out of, hiding in due time. Vulpecula answered back, neither proud nor dissatisfied. It was an interesting case to say the least, one of misdirection, flamboyance, showmanship, and intellectual turmoil. Vulpecula sat back in his chair, looking at the distraught and dissatisfied Lacerda, while also looking at the confusion in the eyes of Apis. He couldn't remember all of the ties that he had found in the first place. Once the chalkboard was erased, it was gone forever. He kept notes and information stored somewhere or another, as you are reading, but he rarely found sentiment in them. He kept one fact and one fact alone. The answer to his case was to be revealed by itself. Eric Leon would find the whereabouts of Molly Louise as soon as everybody else and react with whichever emotion suited him. He'd likely feel hurt or angry, but it wasn't for Vulpecula to cause. Vulpecula merely took the time to put Eric Leon's heart at ease, informing him that Molly Louise was safe, and told him to go home and get some much-needed rest. Molly Louise's Disappearing Act, Magnet's newest attraction, written by Michael Stiles of the Rescue Tribune.
Less than 2 weeks ago, visitors of McKinley Halls, as well as citizens of Asera alike, were taken aghast by the disappearance of actress Molly Louise, performing the leading role as Amy Sexton in the highly acclaimed A Blood-Lane Starlet. Molly Louise stepped upon and triggered a trapdoor, sending her beneath the stage. The fellow performers dismissed this as an individual mistakenly unlocking the latch, to the comical dismay of Molly Louise. However, they soon realized that Molly Louise was nowhere to be seen. We have since learned that there was another story being told only known by Molly Louise and a very select few. There was nobody on stage that knew about what I was doing. I couldn't see the reaction, but I am told by my friends that nobody knew what was going on. Louise tells that Rescue Tribune interviewer Michael Stiles, Molly Louise fell safely beneath the stage before being helped to her feet by a member of Magnets, the most prominent group of performers in all Maharis. We made special precautions to ensure nobody discovered us while making our escape. Everybody was looking at the stage, nobody knew what was going on, and we used it as a chance to go through the emergency exit. There were a lot of Magnets members blocking me from view also, says the newly established Magnet member. Molly Louise did not go completely missed, as one witness recalled seeing her flee in the parking lot minutes after. Molly Louise has confirmed the validity of this statement and clarified that she was nervous about going through the staged kidnapping. Some might be uncertain as to why Molly Louise would have wanted to do such a large and controversial spectacle. Magnet has long since established a name for itself by having the finest that Asera-born performers offered. And while Molly Louise has made herself prominent as one of the most known actresses ever to come out of North Rights, she was born in Hardan. There are certain traditions that are upheld by Magnet. They rarely make exceptions, but I needed them to make one badly. If you are not a member of Magnet, you might as well go home, and I couldn't accept that I wouldn't be allowed in by a technicality. They told me that if I did something extraordinary, that they would let me into the group, and so here I am. Molly Louise revealed herself at the McKinley Halls' biggest available theater in front of over 10,000 audience members and was welcomed as the newest member of Magnet. She will be joining the troupe throughout this year, participating in various acts that have yet to be specified. I realized that there are a lot of things that I had to do. I might have surprised a lot with my actions, but looking back at where I was and looking at where I am now, I have no regrets about my decision.